the film had 2 fact checks, right? And I think
fact check.
it probably needed another 40 or so. So,
well, that's what we're here for.
I would have shot my TV. I'd have got a gun license, I'd have got a gun, and I'd have shot my TV if there had been 40 fact checks in that film with that big obnoxious font.
but it definitely needed it. So that's why we're here today. So let me hand it over to Mr. Panorama himself.
Okie dokie. So, Hunter Biden's laptop. Now, the first time we heard about the specific laptop was considered a bit of an October surprise. Now, it came out in the New York Post in October 2020. Now, this wasn't when the laptop was dropped off, but we'll get into that because it's a bit of a complicated timeline. But in October 2020, the New York Post ran with the title, "Smoking Gun Email Reveals How Hunter Biden Introduced Ukrainian Businessman to VP Dad." And this was a story that was written by a woman called Emma Jo Morris. Now, Emma Jo Morris, it's a little curious as to why she wrote this, because she'd never actually written anything before. She wasn't a published journalist. She'd previously worked in a sort of editorial capacity, I believe, for Breitbart News, and she'd worked as a guest booker on Hannity and Combs. She worked specifically with Sean Hannity, you know, the news guy that looks like a sort of bully from a 1980s film. Him.
Yeah, because he is a bully from a 1980s film.
This is true. So she wrote this story, and it's bizarre because this woman has never actually written any stories before. She's only ever written 3 stories in her entire life, all published by the New York Post, all about Hunter Biden. Whether there's any significance to this, we shall find out. But the story said, Hunter Biden introduced his father, then VP Joe Biden, to a top executive at a Ukrainian energy firm less than a year before the elder Biden pressured government officials into firing a prosecutor who was investigating the company, according to emails obtained by the Post. So what's happened is they've got these emails from Hunter Biden's laptop, and this is the story of corruption that unfolds. Vadim Pozharsky, who's an advisor to the board of this big Ukrainian company called Burisma, he said in an email, "Dear Hunter, thank you for inviting me to DC and for giving an opportunity to meet your father and spend some time together. Reality is an honor and a pleasure." And he's obviously misspelled really there. So this board advisor to Burisma has emailed Hunter Biden, who also works for Burisma at the time, basically saying, thank you for introducing me to my father, to your father, or so it would seem. And the New York Post thinks that this is suspicious. This is an early email from May 2014 from Pozharsky to Hunter, was asking for advice on how you could use your influence on the company's behalf. And so the board members are basically asking Hunter how he can use his political influence to benefit the company. And this has turned up in the emails. Other emails and other files that were recovered from this laptop show him having sex with prostitutes and sometimes just on his own, and smoking crack, sometimes with prostitutes, sometimes on his own.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Whenever you say having sex on his own,
yes,
you mean...
Yes.
Pretty obvious. Okay. I'm not sure why he recorded that, but never mind.
Who knows? Who can say? Like, it's each to their own. Like, I've never really been tempted myself, but yeah, who knows? Perhaps it was part of maybe that's what you have to do to get to work for these large Ukrainian gas firms. Who knows? But anyway,
sounds like a Skull and Bones ritual to me.
Oh, possibly. Anyway, so to support this, what the article actually does is it shows the supposed signature of Hunter Biden on a slip that was with the laptop when he handed it into this Delaware repair shop in April 2019. So they seem to have evidence that it actually was there. And it says that the laptop was dropped off in 2019, but Mac Isaac couldn't identify Hunter because he is legally blind. Pimp Squad, baby. POP. I'm going to say that every time the phrase legally blind comes up until it becomes funny. And if people don't know that meme, well, then you haven't lived. So he didn't know this guy because he's legally blind, right? And so he couldn't recognize who he was, but he sort of figured out that it was Hunter Biden because the laptop had a Beau Biden Foundation sticker on it. So anyway, this the bloke that ran this shop was called John Paul Mac Isaac. That's his name. He's got this very strange sort of 4 times name. And what happened was, he made a copy of the hard drive. He was going through the hard drive and he saw illegal activity on there, and he felt that he needed to report this. So he made a copy of the hard drive and he gave one copy to the FBI. And according to the New York Post, he gave another copy to Rudy Giuliani. He actually also sent them off to a couple of other senators, one of them which was Jim Jordan, but they basically just ignored it. So the New York Post continues, less than 8 months after Pozharskyi thanked Hunter Biden for the introduction to his dad, the then vice president pressured the Ukrainian president Petro Poroshenko and the prime minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk into getting rid of the general prosecutor Viktor Shokin by threatening to withhold $1 billion in US loans in December of 2015. And then it quotes Joe Biden, and this is all on film. It says, I looked at them and I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor isn't fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch, he got fired. Now, Shokin, who was the prosecutor general at the time, according to the New York Post, had made specific plans to investigate Burisma that included interrogations and other criminal investigation procedures into all members of the executive board, including Hunter Biden. So what they're suggesting is that Joe Biden withheld US government money from the Ukrainian government until they got rid of Viktor Shokin, because Viktor Shokin was about to investigate the company that Hunter worked for, and by inference, he was going to also investigate Hunter Biden. So in order to protect Hunter, Joe has basically said, we're not giving you this money unless you fire that prosecutor. That is the allegation that the New York Post has come out with, that it claims it found the evidence for on the laptop. So NBC's Savannah Guthrie asked Biden Sr. in February 2019, was it wrong for Hunter Biden to take that position, knowing that it was really because the company only wanted access to you? So this is like a different reporter has already raised the question, is it right for Hunter Biden to be working for Burisma? And Biden responded at the time, that's not true. You're saying things that you do not know what you're talking about. And so he just basically denied it. So which kind of looks a bit suspicious, to be quite honest. And later, Joe Biden was actually heckled at a Democratic primary, and somebody shouted, why are you sending Hunter to Ukraine to get a job and work for a gas company? He had no experience with gas or nothing, in order to get access to the president. So he's not the catchiest of heckles, but basically it is succinct in what it's trying to get across, that basically he's protecting Hunter, and Hunter's only got this job because of the access to the vice president that this would afford. And in response to this, Joe Biden acted with decorum. No, he didn't. He turned around and called the bloke a big fat guy and told him that he could do more press-ups than him. Which, it's not brilliant, if we're brutally honest.
No.
But anyway, this was the sort of first foray into the supposed corruption of Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. And what sort of preceded this in May of that year was a tape that was released via Rudy Giuliani and a bloke called Andrzej Derkach. And this was a tape of a supposed recording of Poroshenko, who was the president at the time, and Joe Biden essentially having an extension of this argument, basically saying that he was blackmailing him into not looking into Hunter, and this was where it piqued everybody's interest. Now, the reason that basically this tape was not taken seriously by a lot of people is because Derkach has got connections to both Putin and the KGB, and so the provenance of these particular tapes was, even at the time, was thought to be in doubt, and so a lot of people didn't really sort of pay any attention to them. But then, luckily, the New York Post got hold of these emails and stuff, which seemed to sort of back up the idea that that may well have occurred. Now, the second New York Post article that came out the same month was also by Emma Jo Morris. Again, this was the second article that she'd written in her entire life. But here's what was strange about this article. For some reason, a lady called Gabrielle Fonrouge, who is an established byline journalist, her name was also added to the piece. Now, she says that she had nothing to do with the piece and didn't understand why her name was added to the piece. And some have speculated that it might have been to give a degree of credibility to a story that some people were already saying that was a little bit sensationalized, potentially. And if we remember, Emma Jo Morris had previously worked for Breitbart and Sean Hannity. Anyway, the second story was even more salacious. It said emails reveal how Hunter Biden tried to cash in big on behalf of the family with a Chinese firm. And it says Hunter Biden pursued lucrative deals involving China's largest private energy company, including one that he said would be interesting for my family. One email sent to Biden on May the 13th, 2017, with the subject line, expectations, included details of remuneration packages for 6 people in an unspecified business venture. Biden was identified as the chair/vice chair, depending on which deal with CEFC went through, and his pay was pegged at $850,000. So what these emails are revealing is that he's got an incredibly high-paid job to work with this company, this Chinese company called CEFC. Now, in the emails, in addition, the email outlined a provisional agreement under which 80% of the equity would be split among 4 people. H, being Hunter, got 20% of this 80% equity of the company. Now, this is the smoking gun. The email said 10 held by H for the big guy. Now, H is Hunter, and the big guy, it is suggested, refers to his dad. And so what this is suggesting is that if the business deal was going to go through with CFC, 80% of the equity would basically be split among 4 people, and 10% of that would be set aside to go as a gift, essentially, to Vice President Joe Biden. Although at the time, this is 2017, so he wasn't vice president, but he was still involved in politics. And basically, so he's trying to invest in CEFC offshoots, and he set aside 10% for his dad. Another email sent by Hunter in August of 2017 concerned a deal that was struck with the chairman of CEFC, Yi Jianming, for half ownership of a holding company expected to provide Hunter with $10 million a year. So he's getting paid $10 million a year in one venture and $850,000 a year in another venture with this Chinese firm, CEFC. Now, interesting, Yi Jianming, who's the person that's behind this deal, was arrested and vanished in 2018, so just a year after this deal was taking place. And the suggestion is that maybe he might have been disappeared by the Chinese government. He's previously been involved in the Chinese military and the Chinese Secret Service. So it's not really somebody that it looks good for a son of an American politician to be involved with. Now, Biden also wrote in these emails that Yi had sweetened the terms of an earlier 3-year consulting contract with CFC that was to pay him $10 million a year for introductions alone. So his job that he was getting $10 million a year for was simply to be a schmoozer, to try and introduce people to the company and introduce the company to people in order for them to invest and or whatever it is that rich Chinese people do. And Hunter wrote in one of the emails when they were discussing creating this holding company, which was to be called Hudson West. Hunter wrote in an email, "This is so much more interesting to me and my family." And so he's very much looking like the New York Post might be onto something here. There's 10% set aside for his dad. He's saying that basically, this is looking very interesting for my family. Yeah. And these are emails that are purportedly off Hunter Biden's laptops that are from Hunter Biden involving this deal. The documents obtained by the Post also include an attorney engagement letter from 2017, in which one of Yi's top lieutenants, a gentleman called Chi Peng Patrick Ho, who was a former Hong Kong government official and suspected Chinese spy, he agreed to pay Biden $1 million retainer for legal counsel to matters related to a U.S. law and advice pertaining to the hiring and legal analysis of a U.S. law firm or lawyer. Basically, what happened is Patrick Ho had got into trouble trying to bribe certain African countries. Yes, like in a sort of almost like a sort of coup thing for the Chinese government, and he was found out about this, and he ended up actually serving jail time. But he paid Hunter Biden a huge amount of money just for legal advice, essentially, and kept him on retainer. Mm-hmm. In December 2018, he was convicted of 2 schemes to pay $3 million in bribes to high-ranking government officials in Africa for oil rights in Chad and lucrative business deals in Uganda. And he ended up serving a 3-year sentence. So Hunter Biden wasn't able to help him, but he certainly received, or it seems to have received, a huge amount of money from them at the time. The third New York Post article was written by a lady called Miranda Devine. Now, Miranda Devine has actually written a book about this as well called The Laptop from Hell. And this is apparently the go-to book if you want to find all the sort of juicy, salacious details. But she wrote an article in the New York Post, and this was in May of 2021. It said, Hunter Biden brought VP Joe to dinner with shady business partners. And so what this is talking about is the meeting that was discussed in that first email. If you remember, the email came from the guy from Burisma saying, thank you for introducing me to your father. They've found out more details of that. Joe Biden met with Ukrainian, Russian, and Kazakhstani business associates of his son at a dinner in Washington, D.C., whilst he was vice president, records on Hunter Biden's abandoned laptop show. The dinner on April 16, 2015, was held in the private garden room at Cafe Milano, a Georgetown institution whose catchphrase is, where the world's most powerful people go. The next day, Hunter received an email from Vadim Pozarsky, an executive of the Ukrainian energy company Burisma, to thank him for introducing him to his father. Dear Hunter, thank you for inviting me to DC and giving an opportunity to meet your father and spend some time together. And this is the same email that we've heard previously. And the New York Post says that at the time, documents reveal that Burisma was paying Hunter Biden $83,333 a month, which is not bad work if you can get it. And
it's a good wage.
It's not bad, is it? It's not bad at all. So what happened was, on March the 26th, Hunter emailed the son of Alex Karloutzos saying, Dad will be there, but keep that between us now. And Alex Karloutzos is basically, he's connected to the Greek Orthodox Church, and there was a priest there that Joe Biden wanted to actually meet, and that was why he was there. But this was the opportunity for Hunter to introduce these Ukrainian businessmen to his father, and this is what the New York Post thinks is dodgy. And the email said, okay, but the reason for the dinner is ostensibly to discuss food security, because at the time, Hunter Biden was working for the World Health Organization on the World Food Initiative Program or something like that. We'll figure that one later. But he says that the guest list included Russian billionaire Yelena Bakhturina and her husband, the corrupt former Moscow mayor Yuri Lutskov, who has since died. Bakhturina wired $3.5 million to Rosemont Seneca Thornton LLC, a Delaware-based investment firm co-founded by Hunter and by Devon Archer. The wires were flagged in suspicious activity reports provided by the Treasury to a Senate Republican inquiry into Hunter that began last year. And the guest list included Vadim, who is thought to be Pozarsky, who's the bloke from Burisma. But essentially, the other tantalizing thing here is that essentially a firm that Hunter was connected to received $3.5 million from the wife of the former mayor of Moscow, and it isn't clear, according to the New York Post, why such a deal happened. So just to give a little bit of background, so Burisma is a holding company that's set up in the Ukraine. It basically is a holding company for a group of energy exploration and production companies. How exactly it works, I'm not entirely sure, but it seems to make a huge amount of money from extracting and selling natural gas. It was founded in 2002, and it's a major shareholder of the Sunrise Energy Resources in Delaware, and it exports energy from Ukraine and Kazakhstan, and has 35 gas production licenses in the Ukraine. So there is actually a sort of business connection to Delaware, and Delaware is famously where the Bidens are from. But by 2016, it was the second largest privately owned gas producer in the Ukraine. And it's owned by a company called Broccoli Investments, which is based in Cyprus, and it's owned by a chap called Mykola Zlukevsky. Now, Zlukevsky is the bloke that's in the Hunter Biden film. He's portrayed as big bearded and long black hair, but doesn't look anything like that in real life. And he was the Minister of Natural Resources under the previous President Yankovic. Now, in April 2014, the UK Serious Fraud Office was investigating Zlukevsky for money laundering, and for some reason, the Ukraine failed to cooperate. And this is what started the investigation by Viktor Shokan. Can I just say, this has been getting on my nerves for a while now, because people are talking about Hunter Biden using money for laundering. There was laundering money through the Ukraine. And they're speaking about that at the minute. They're saying that basically the war in the Ukraine is to launder money. Right. Anybody that says that doesn't understand what laundering money is, okay? What laundering money is you take money that's dirty, like that you got from selling drugs or prostitution or something that you cannot declare, but you want to use this money in a legal way. So you want it cleaned, hence laundered. So let's say I have £200,000 in my back pocket. I can't go up to a bank and say, can I just put this in? Because they want to know where I got this from. This is where laundering comes in. Laundering is making that money clean, legal, and taxable. One way to do it would be through a laundromat or any other cash business, concerts, for example, because you can just not take money from the public, but pretend that all this money came through the public, and then you can legitimately put it in a bank and use it. That's laundering. That's what laundering money is. That's what the mafia do. That's what drug dealers do. It's so that you can then use these ill-gotten gains for legal purchases like cars, houses, stock, and stuff like that. It's washing money and making it clean and taxable. That is not anything like what they're accusing the Bidens of doing or Zelensky of doing at the minute. What they're accusing them of doing is taking money that's appropriated for something and just stealing it. For a start, there is absolutely no evidence that that's happening now or happened in the past. But most gallingly, that's not laundering. That's embezzlement, you dumb fuckers. You can't even get your crimes right. And that's that's been really grinding my gears for a long time. So I just needed to get that off my chest.
I have to also say here, there's another claim done by the Russian propaganda that 90% of the arms we give to Ukraine get stolen and never actually make it to the front line.
Yeah.
And I'm just well, you're telling me that Ukraine is liberating Kherson and all these places with no help whatsoever. That makes me like them even more.
Yeah, it's 10% of the weapons, isn't it? Makes it more impressive. Yeah. It's nonsense. I mean, there's zero evidence to back up any of those claims, and that's the sort of most important thing, that they've just been spun out of whole cloth. And bizarrely, they've been repeated by quite a lot of reporters on GB News. Why that is, I've got absolutely no idea, but for some reason they seem to go with that. So anyway, where some actual laundering was going on was Zlukevsky was actually money laundering because he's a gangster and he wanted to get his money that he's got from gangsterism and all that gangster shit into sort of some sort of like legal sense, essentially, so that I assume so that he can get out of the hood, unless Snoop Doggy Dogs lied to me. Anyway. He was also accused of tax evasion of up to nearly $1 billion. So again, this is why he's trying to launder this money, because basically it allows him to sort of present it in a way that he can pay tax on it, and then they'll ignore this, that he hasn't paid tax on it. But anyway, so in 2016, its subsidiary, Esco Punich, was found to have violated tax law, and Burisma paid over $7 million in back tax. So we'll come back to that. Mykola Zlochevsky is the guy that basically is in charge of Burisma. He's a very dodgy character, and that is essentially why there was an investigation launched. What happened was the UK started it. The Ukraine really wasn't very good at doing it very well. And at this point, the Bidens stepped in and refused to sort of give them the money. Mykola Zlochevsky, he served as the Ecology and Natural Resources Minister during Azarov and the former pro-Russian Prime Minister for the Ukraine. There's a lot of things going on in the background of this that to do with Russia and the Ukraine, is being played out now, is because those two countries have got a long, complex history that goes on between them. And he was the National Security and Defense Counselor under President Yankovic. In 2012, Viktor Pashonka started investigating Burisma, but he wasn't deemed to be doing a very good job, and so Viktor Shokin was brought in, and Viktor Shokin was the guy that was eventually fired at the behest of Joe Biden. 2014, Zlochevsky wired $24 million to a bank in Latvia, and at this point, he fled the Ukraine because he was under investigation for all these tax evasion crimes. In 2017, the investigation into Burisma concluded, and in 2018, the year afterwards, the cheeky sod just came back to the Ukraine and wired all of his money back there because basically he was no longer under investigation. But then a case was reopened, and he was found to have illegally issued gas and oil licenses to companies that he owned. But you'll never guess what he did. He did a moonlight flit again. And as of 2019, he's believed to be in Monaco, but nobody knows. And he's suspected of theft of government funds on an especially large scale. So he's stolen a huge amount of money. But so that is essentially why there was an investigation into Burisma, because the gentleman who runs the company has got a history of being corrupt. He's a gangster, and he was laundering money through the firm, but he was also avoiding tax in an incredibly huge scale. So the idea that Burisma has a degree of corruption isn't without merit. So, perhaps the New York Post is onto something. Who knows? The next thing that we've got is Rudy Giuliani. Now, Rudy Giuliani got heavily involved in this, and has basically made his sort of his cause to expose what's on the laptop. And in May of 2022, so just this year, he was interviewed by Charlie Kirk. Great. It says, yes, Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA. So again, there is a theme that runs through this that we'll discuss later. Joining us is Rudy Giuliani, who has been vindicated on the entire Hunter Biden laptop, which was previously called Russian disinformation. How does it feel, Rudy? How does it feel after a year and a half? All of a sudden, the Washington Post says this is a time for reckoning. And what he's talking about is, for a long time, it was considered or doubted that the contents of this laptop were actually from Hunter Biden. There was a lot of people who suggested that there's just no proof. This could have been mocked up by anybody. The circumstances around the finding of the laptop was a bit cagey, and so they didn't really believe anything, and they were cautious to publish anything, particularly in regards to saying that it was definitely factual, except for places like the New York Post, and it was all over Twitter, to be quite honest, and it was in the Daily Mail and various other places. But other than that, Fox News also published content.
One thing we should just say before we move on is, how many laptops are there? Because the movie claims 2. Is it just 1 in reality?
Right. We will go into this in detail, but there was originally 3, of which 1 has got the content on, but this was copied at least 3 times and has since been copied by numerous other people. So where the original laptop is, nobody knows. And the provenance of the original laptop is still somewhat shaky. However, the content appears to be from Hunter Biden. And that is what essentially happened. After a long time, basically, they were able to say, we've looked at the content, and these emails do appear to have come from Hunter Biden to whoever it stated that they are. And so in that sense, they were considered real. So you might hear a lot of people saying Hunter Biden's laptop was real. And that is about this, because there's a sliding scale. Some people says, oh, come on, this has obviously just been hacked by Russia, or it's fake, or it's completely mocked up. And then there were some people that said, okay, this looks like a complete smoking gun of criminal activity. And the truth, as is always the case, lies somewhere in between. It would appear that basically the contents of the emails that were spoken about by the New York Post were real, in as much as they were genuine emails written by Hunter Biden sent to the recipients, and they can prove this. And the Washington Post had basically written an article saying that this is what had happened. And so Rudy Giuliani and Charlie Kirk are basically saying, see, for all this time you called me an agent of Russia. You said that it was all misinformation and disinformation, but there is actual evidence of serious crimes on this laptop. And but Rudy says that he's a bit sort of disconcerted by the Washington Post actually coming out in support of him, because he says, I go back to Ronald Reagan, and his rule was, we're not on track if the New York Times and the Washington Post aren't criticizing us. So the fact that they're supporting him is seen as a major, major win and a vindication of what Rudy's been saying. So Rudy explains, he says that Hunter's the fall guy. Hunter is the bad guy now. He did everything poor old Joe didn't know a thing. Poor old Joe couldn't figure out how Hunter, who was in and out of rehab 12 times, who could never hold down a job that Joe didn't get for him. But even when Joe did get him the job, he got fired from the military for cocaine. He wasn't allowed in the Ukraine because the crooked guy who hired him didn't want him buying drugs on the street. But Joe couldn't figure out how this guy became a multimillionaire. That's probably fair criticism. Like, I have to say, that is a pretty accurate summation of what was going on in Hunter Biden's life. He was a financial and a drug-addicted mess. He couldn't get his life together at all. And yet he kept being given opportunities again and again and again that were incredibly lucrative to the point that most people would never even dream of seeing one of these salaries, let alone the numerous salaries that he's got all at the same time, all from sort of seemingly corrupt entities. And he says, and all of a sudden, every week, half of the guy's income would show up in his bank account. So what Rudy Giuliani's saying there is that half of Hunter Biden's salary every month went directly to Joe Biden. So if true, that's shocking. And this is fraud upon fraud. The top of this conspiracy is Joe Biden. This is not the Hunter Biden case. Any prosecutor who understands their oath of office would have begun this 2.5 years ago. It's the Joe Biden conspiracy case, and now he would have to be on trial and convicted of racketeering. So what he's suggesting is basically that Hunter Biden's the gopher, essentially. This is racketeering from a criminal organization, namely the Biden family. And he goes on, he says, Hunter made $41 million in China. He made $18 million in Ukraine. He made bare minimum $3.2 million from the mayor of Moscow's wife, who was a very dedicated Putin ally. And people like Miranda Devine, who wrote The Laptop from Hell, think that they can count $100 million that Hunter got from nefarious places. So he wasn't just taking bribes, he was selling out the country to the biggest enemies of the United States. And Rudy says that Joe Biden is provably a traitor to the country. And, it's very, very shocking if true. And Rudy brings up this recent gun charge. And what happened is basically, this came out quite recently. Hunter Biden bought a gun. I think it was in 2018 when he was still addicted to crack. And he didn't declare this on the form. So this is technically a felony. You have to declare if you're an addict of any kind or there's anything that might impair you from using a gun. Some might point out that maybe a form isn't the most airtight way of wheedling those people out, and that potentially, if America was concerned with that maybe there would be other ways of finding stuff like that out. But that's another show anyway. And he says basically, like, he bought a gun, he didn't declare his addiction. You can get 5 years for that, and people do regularly. And that's not to mention the money laundering of $3.5 million of what Joe got, of which Joe got $900,000. He says that the hard drive is replete with information more about Joe than there is about Hunter. And yeah, I know. Charlie Kirk says, would you have done anything different with the laptop? Because what happened was, Mac Isaac gave the laptop to Rudy Giuliani's friend. Rudy Giuliani's friend gave it to Rudy, and then Rudy gave it to the New York Post. And he says, would you have done anything different with it? And he says, what, you mean, should I have given it out to everybody instead of just the 4 or 5 people who promised to handle it honestly? Now, I realise that I would have been double-crossed. Why didn't we give it to the Washington Post in the first place? Because I knew they'd write an article like this one, where they say it's all Hunter and not Joe. So he's saying that that's why he gave it to the New York Post. But the New York Times and the Washington Post, as far as they're concerned, there's nothing about Joe Biden on the laptop. But he says that there is a text in which Hunter Biden says, I gave 50% for over 30 years to Joe Biden, and none of the newspapers have published that. So again, if true, that's absolutely huge. That's like something that we really need to look at. Rudy also mentions the reference to the big guy. You know, the thing that we said about 10 being put aside for the big guy? He searched through the hard drive and he's found 9 references to Hunter calling Joe Biden the big guy. He says that Hunter's ex-business partner, Tony Bobulinski, also claims that Hunter used the big guy to refer to Joe. And Tony Bobulinski keeps popping up and down. Like, basically, he's an ex sort of business partner of the Bidens. He was working with Hunter and James Biden, who's Hunter's uncle, in China. And Bobulinski claims that Jim Biden cheated him out of millions by embezzling, at least he's got the word right, $5 million of the $10 million that CEFC gave them. Hunter Biden stole it from me, he says. He claims that they copied a contract and claimed bank details to funnel money. And it appears that Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and the Biden family really copied the same document down to typos, the serial number, and basically what he says. This is their grand scheme to steal his share of this money. They copied the contract, and where it said Oneida Holdings, which was Tony Bobulinski's firm, they replaced it with Owasako Holdings. And then Tony Bobulinski didn't read the contract properly, signed it, and signed all this money over to the Bidens. If that's true, the man is stupid. Like, he just hasn't read his contract properly. Like, whether that is true or not, we don't really know. Anyway, going on to how many copies of the laptop there are. Rudy says here, I've tried to give the FBI 3 different copies of the laptop. I have 2 different versions of the laptop. I have the complete version, and I have the version without child pornography on it. I don't like to give out the one with child pornography, but I turn it into the Delaware police and they have done nothing. And Charlie Kirk says, what? Hunter had child pornography on his laptop? To which Rudy says, yes, he did. There are at least 2 examples of child pornography. And there's also an admission to his father that has never been published in which he says, I am a danger to the children. So that's Rudy Giuliani sort of kind of admitting that he has child pornography in his possession, but that's not the thing that you're supposed to sort of take from that. You're supposed to take that Hunter Biden has apparently had it on his laptop.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing which is very difficult about how all this is. You know, if the story is as presented by Giuliani, Giuliani's handled this laptop horribly.
Yep, totally.
Even if we assume that whenever we say Giuliani looked through the files on the drive, we take that to mean Giuliani hired somebody who understands something about how to forensically go through a volume to do that for him. The fact that they've done this, they've copied this, they've sent copies, blah, blah, blah. even if it's like absolutely as they presented it, they've handled this stuff so poorly that they've basically done all they could to ensure that there's no convictions coming from this.
No, exactly. If there's something illegal on it, then he shouldn't be holding it. He should be just giving it straight over to authorities.
But you've hit the nail on the head. This is exactly why outlets like Twitter and to a lesser degree Facebook sort of balked at the idea of people readily spreading this around. Again, the idea that this is suppressed is just nonsense, because I'm pretty sure we've all seen the photos and potentially the videos of Hunter Biden smoking crack and wearing the scarf and the sunglasses and, the one of his tattoo on his back and stuff like that, and various stuff. So this idea that it was in any way suppressed doesn't really stand up to scrutiny, to be quite honest. Now, what people are saying, like Giuliani in the New York Post, is that people are ignoring this clear smoking gun evidence. Is that the case? We'll get into that in due course. But where did the laptop come from? Now, again, this is something that is steeped a little bit in mystery, because, well, we now know that we have an interview on the Will Cairn podcast. John Paul MacIsaac, the infamous Delaware repair shop man, explained exactly how this came to pass. Now, remember that the story broke in October of 2020. Does anybody know when the laptop was actually dropped off, supposedly, at John MacIsaac's Delaware shop?
Well, the movie claims there was a 90-day gap, wasn't there? So I don't know. But
the 90 days pertains to after it's been left in the shop for repair. If you don't return after 90 days, the shop claims ownership of that product, which is how he's able to share it and how he's not been done for revenge porn and stuff like that. But the actual date that it was dropped off at the Delaware shop, now, again, this is October 2020 that the New York Post came out with the story. The laptop was dropped off in April 2019.
Right.
April 2019.
It seems there's some electioneering going on here with the timing.
Well, there's some reason why they've waited over a year to sort of produce the contents of this in any sort of serious way. Now, basically he says, I want you to begin in April 2019 on a Friday night just before closing time. And he says, it was about 10 minutes before closing. I was definitely thinking about getting out of work, not spending any time or staying late with anyone. And a car pulled up, and I let out a sigh because I realised my evening had been cut abruptly short. Any plans I had for that evening, they were gone. So the client walked in the door with 3 liquid-damaged MacBook Pros. I was able to check in one of them. One was a write-off, and the other one I left with the customer so that he could take it with him and do the recovery himself. So originally there were 3 laptops. One is left at the shop because he says that he can recover the data off of this. And he says, when I saw the Beau Biden Foundation sticker and the customer informed me that he was Hunter Biden, I instantly thought that this must have been his deceased brother's laptop and he wanted to get his memories off there. So you must remember, he saw the Beau Biden sticker and he instantly understood what was going off, that this must be Beau Biden's laptop. He reasoned that this was his brother, and so he wanted to recover his precious memories. And he says, did you recognize him? Because I've read that you are legally blind. P.O.P., hold it down. Anyway, when he walks in, at what point do you realize that it's Hunter Biden? And he says, well, when I asked his last name, when it got to Hunton, I asked the last name and he says, Biden, kind of sarcastically, as if I should have known. And then I put 2 and 2 together. The Beau Biden, I never knew what he looked like, and I never really cared. It wasn't my inclination to care about the Biden family and what they got up to. So he's got no axe to grind, absolutely nothing like that at all. But did you know about Hunter Biden's story? His troubles, his drug addictions. No, not really. I mean, you hear stories about the crazy Biden kids, but that's about it. I mean, I live in the same town as the Bidens. People I know and hang out with went to school with Hunter Biden. I know several people who've not been paid by the Biden family. And it's like, well, so do you know the Biden family or don't you? But anyway, let's not get bogged down with that. So what was the state of Hunter Biden when he came in? And he says, well, he was definitely feeling no pain. He was intoxicated. He had a bit of a mobility issue. Speech was slurred. I left 45 minutes after he did, and his vehicle was still there, so I assumed he was in the back seat, sleeping one off. And then they mentioned that Hunter Biden's password to get into his locked laptop was something a little ribald, shall we say. John MacIsaac said that he was terribly embarrassed by this. I'm just going to say it. The password was analfuck69, which, as far as I'm concerned, isn't actually a thing. But anyway, let's not get bogged down.
I like that's your takeaway.
It's wonderfully creative. No wonder he went into painting.
A 14-year-old kid would have the password on their Xbox profile or something like that.
It is a bit, isn't it? But anyway, apparently this was the Hunter Biden's password. So Hunter left one laptop at the shop, and so John Paul MacIsaac, he backed up the machine, and as he was backing it up and transferring all these files across, he was opening videos, and he started to notice, as my grandfather would say, a shit ton of porn. He basically, the guy says, did you break any ethical guidelines by looking into this data? And he says, well, no, you know what? No, I don't think so. And he wanted me to recover his data. And whether a customer requires a data recovery, it's usually for either movies or pictures, things that you can't replace. So I have to go in and look at that data and see what that data is. And he says, I saw multiple illegal acts at the same time. And let's just aside the snitching ass nature of that. Right, okay. Because, I don't know about, but if he'd have gone to my school, he'd have got the shit kicked out of him for that. But anyway, let's not get bogged down. What he saw was basically smoking crack and prostitution. Also, he says that he saw very dodgy financial documents and stuff in emails and stuff like that. What he's referring to then is that one email that says, thank you for introducing me to your father. Why he'd be interested in that untitled email, why he'd even find that email buried in all the sent documents or whatever, that is a mystery that has never been adequately explained. But anyway, he was seeing all these illegal acts, drug use and prostitution and stuff. And he says, so what do you do next? And he says, well, I do the job, His dad's not running for president. He's just a regular guy. So I just get the data. I saw a couple of financial documents that raised some questions, red flags. But that's none of my business. So 2 weeks later, his dad announced his candidacy. And that's when I started to get the fear. I've seen some very embarrassing stuff on this laptop. And I'm pretty sure that nobody is going to want this embarrassing material out there. So I got more and more concerned for my personal safety because, the Secret Service is essentially the Biden family fixer service. And what he's saying is that he's suddenly become very terrified that the Biden family are going to kill him. The Biden family who he knows nothing about and he's not really interested in politically. He's now concerned that the Secret Service are going to kill him for the contents of this laptop that was dropped off by Hunter Biden a couple of weeks ago. So anyway, he says they bailed out Hunter, whether it's pulling guns out of trash cans or waking him up when he OD'd in a hotel using his dad's credit card. And so I expected the Secret Service to come to the shop, sweep up the laptop and take it away with me. And again, I thought he had no prior knowledge of Hunter Biden, but he knows about an incident of him ODing in a hotel room, which I'm not au fait with, and an instance of him basically, what happened was when he bought that gun, the gun that was illegal, his girlfriend at the time, Haley, who is his brother's widow, she found the gun, thought probably best for a crack addict not to have a gun. So she did the sensible thing. She threw it away in a bin in a park. Yeah, she threw it away in a bin in a park, and a homeless man went through that bin and actually found the gun. Now, what happened next is a little bit of a mystery, but essentially the Secret Service apparently turned up, confiscated the gun, and made the entire problem go away. But the Secret Service actually deny this. So it seems pretty clear that they probably did, but they just don't want to publicize it. But it is interesting that these very intimate details of Hunter are known by somebody that is completely not interested in the Biden family at all. So anyway, he finished the job and he phoned Hunter, told him to buy a hard drive. And apparently Hunter Biden came back to the shop, dropped off this hard drive, and then disappeared again. And the idea was that he was supposed to, to come back and pick up the hard drive. He never did. And so at this point, John Paul MacIsaac claims ownership of the laptop. Interestingly, he'd actually started moving files and copying it onto a separate hard drive before the 90-day period had actually happened. So there's something very, very dodgy. And so what happened? He goes, well, on October the 13th, the day before the New York article comes out, he claims that Hunter Biden's attorney phoned him and said, we want our laptop back. Now, whether this happened, we don't know, because all that there is his say-so and a scrawled signature that may or may not be Hunter Biden's signature that was dropped off at the shop. The CCTV has been destroyed. There's no phone records or anything like that. There's nothing except for pretty much this guy say-so, who we must remember is legally blind. P.O.P. So it is a little bit cagey. So he goes, so what did you do? Did you speak to an attorney about it? And he says, well, in mid-July, and this is mid-July of 2019, I thought I have to get this out of my shop. Burisma was in the news, Burisma being the Ukraine thing. And I definitely saw some things that were a concern. Obscenely large amounts of money being exchanged with Burisma for favors from the State Department, basically a pay-for-play scheme. Now, that's never come out. What he's referring to is the Victor Shokin thing and Hunter Biden being paid by the firm that he worked for. But he's framing it there in a way that isn't strictly accurate. Why he's decided to do that, I don't know. But he says, I was reluctant to go to the FBI because I think Roger Stone had just been raided, so I was concerned that the FBI was weaponized. So again, this bloke that's not into politics, but is a big fan of Roger Stone and Rudy Giuliani, knows to send this laptop to Jim Jordan and has intimate knowledge about the sort of salacious details of the Biden family. He decides that he's scared of the FBI. So he's now scared of the Secret Service and the FBI, but he's waited about 6 months to do anything about it. So what he does instead is he sends his dad, who's a retired Air Force colonel, to take the laptop to the FBI in Albuquerque, so in a different state. And it's like, right, okay, why? Now, what happened, and he was very annoyed about this, was the FBI basically said to his dad, where the hell did you get this from? If I was you, I'd lawyer up because you're not supposed to have this. And he sees this as evidence that they were basically trying to cover it up. And he says that on December the 9th, 2019, the FBI finally came to his house and took the original laptop. But he's still got God knows how many copies. It's never been clear exactly how many copies that he's made. And the copy that the FBI received, they said initially that it was kind of impossible to know what was what because he'd set up two files on there, basically one which was stuff that was embarrassing and one which was stuff that he wanted saving. And he knocked all the files into these folders on the original laptop. Why he'd done this, nobody's quite sure. It seemed like an incredible amount of foresight for what he was going to find on the laptop. But anyway, basically since then, he's had a bit of a bad time. He's lost his business. He's had to leave Delaware basically because he keeps getting death threats. But he claims that what was found on the laptop, and you must remember that he's not into politics, but he claims that it completely justified what Trump was impeached for. And that was why he felt the need to get in touch with Rudy Giuliani, because although Trump was being accused of blackmailing the Ukraine, actually Joe Biden had done that very, very thing. And he says, I had intimate knowledge of everything that had happened. So then in August of 2020, so this is over a year after he received it, he makes several copies and sent one to Rudy Giuliani. And the reason that he sent it to Rudy Giuliani was because he'd been following Rudy Giuliani and his explorations into the Bidens in Ukraine as early as 2019. And it's like, hang on, again, I thought you weren't interested in politics, so why would you be interested in that? So following this, Steve Bannon gets a copy, Giuliani gets a copy, and then on October the 14th, the first New York Post article is published. Now, just prior to the New York Post article coming out, Steve Bannon presents a report by an intelligence agency called Typhoon Intelligence. It's supposedly a Swedish intelligence agency, a Swiss intelligence agency that's run by a blogger called Albert Marco, who claims to be a pollster and an expert on international relations. Now, this is a 64-page report that came out, presented by Steve Bannon from Typhoon Intelligence. And in this, it details that Hunter is in bed with the Chinese Communist government. It says that Biden Sr. benefits from these deals with the Chinese government, and that Hunter was being groomed by the CCP as an asset for years, and that as a consequence of this grooming, that Joe Biden had actually changed US policy on China in order to better favor China, all due to something that they had on Hunter Biden, which is, again, nefarious. Very, very recently, another report came out. This was called the Marco Polo Report, and this came out in October of this year, and it was produced by Garrett Ziegler and a company called Marco Polo. Garrett Ziegler is a conservative senator or member of Congress, and this report is 644 pages long. Now, what Ziegler said is, after obtaining a copy of the laptop, Marco Polo investigators had undertaken what every single law enforcement institution in this country, especially and including the FBI, is not going to do: a complete release and a detailed historical record of Hunter Biden's laptop. And they found, apparently, on this laptop, 140 business-related crimes, 191 sex-related crimes, and 128 drug-related crimes. And this is the culmination of 13 months of research by half a dozen men who recognise that the Biden laptop is the Rosetta Stone of political corruption, soft corruption, and crimes. And the crimes include serving as an agent for foreign entities without disclosing it, tax fraud, falsifying business documents, prostitution, non-consensual pornography, and narcotics distribution. So again, it's starting to look pretty damn bad for Hunter Biden. And this is the sort of stuff that we're going to start to see more of, because essentially the Republicans have taken control of the House again. But what's interesting about this is that the laptop wasn't the first indication of crimes connected to the Bidens in the Ukraine. In 2020 and earlier than that, so prior to the knowledge that the laptop existed, there is a journalist called John Solomon, and he was actually very, very sort of involved in the Uranium One scandal. I don't know whether you remember that, but basically the suggestion that Hillary Clinton had profited from the sale of a uranium firm. It turned out to be nonsense, but basically this was one of the things that was used against her to try and sort of discredit her when she was going up against Trump for the election. But he wrote a story in The Hill called Joe Biden's 2020 Ukrainian Nightmare. He says that 2 years after leaving office, Joe Biden couldn't resist the temptation last year to brag to an audience of foreign policy specialists about his time as vice president, that he strong-armed Ukraine into firing its top prosecutor. So again, this is the Viktor Shokin thing. In his own words, with video cameras rolling, Biden described how he threatened Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko in March 2016 that the Obama admin would pull $1 billion in US loan guarantees if he didn't immediately fire prosecutor General Viktor Shokin. And so essentially this is the story that was broken by the New York Post. John Solomon had been talking about this a lot before. And he says that Ukrainian officials tell me that there's a crucial piece of information that the Biden must have known but didn't mention, that the prosecutor he fired, Viktor Shokin, was leading a wide-ranging corruption probe into the gas firm Burisma Holdings that employed Biden's younger son, Hunter, as a board member. Shokin told me in written answers to questions that before he was fired as general prosecutor, he'd made specific plans for the investigation that included interrogations and other crime investigation procedures into all members of the executive board, including Hunter Biden. And he says, he's actually said this in court, Viktor Shokin. He said, the truth is that I was forced out because I was leading a wide-ranging corruption probe into Burisma, a natural gas firm active in Ukraine, and Joe Biden's son Hunter was a member of the board of directors. On several occasions, President Poroshenko asked me to have a look at the criminal case against Burisma and consider the possibility of winding down the investigative actions in respect of the company, but I refused to close the investigation. So, again, just reiterating that this didn't start with the laptop. The laptop is seen as proof that these ongoing investigations were actually correct. There was actually a book that came out in 2018 written by Peter Schweitzer. Peter Schweitzer just so happens to be an editor at Breitbart. I don't know whether that might be connected in some way. But he wrote a book in 2018 that was called Secret Empires and How the American Political Class Hides Corruption and Enriches Family and Friends. Can you guess who this book was about?
The Bidens?
Yes, it was about the Bidens, essentially. And basically, he goes on to say, again, the same sort of thing, that Biden had prevented the money being transferred to the Ukraine unless Viktor Shokin was fired. And he also talks about private bank and various other sort of entities in the Ukraine being very, very corrupt. He says that $1 billion of the $1.8 billion aid went missing and was stolen by a gentleman called Ihor Kolominsky. And what he says is that Kolominsky actually owns Burisma. He says that he's the hidden hand behind Burisma, and that is where basically the money went to. And so he's implying an even further level of corruption that basically this is where the embezzlement apparently comes from. That $1 billion in aid apparently went missing, and the inference is that basically, seeing as Devon Archer and Hunter Biden start working there in 2014, that they probably got some of the money, and this trickled its way to Joe Biden too. So that is what's apparently on Hunter Biden's laptop. There's confirmation that he's introducing people connected to a very, very dodgy firm to his father. There's confirmation or proof that the Prosecutor General, Viktor Shokin, was fired at the behest of Joe Biden, blackmailing the Ukrainian government into preventing him from investigating Burisma in order to protect Hunter. There's a suggestion that he has worked for the Chinese Communist government, that he's worked with spies. There's a suggestion that Joe Biden gets a huge amount of his money. Some have said that he gets 50% of his paycheck. Some people have said that in certain deals there's evidence that he gets 10% put aside. So there's evidence of nepotism. There's evidence of corruption. And according to Rudy Giuliani and several others, there is also evidence of child pornography. According to the Marco Polo report, there's evidence of hundreds of financial crimes, hundreds of sexual crimes, and hundreds of instances of drug taking. And on top of that, Hunter Biden, it looks like he bought a gun in 2018 that he didn't declare that he was addicted to a substance. Therefore, this is a federal crime that could see him prosecuted and given up to 5 years in prison. So that is the story of Hunter Biden's laptop. Which bits of it are true and which bits of it are completely fabricated, we shall discover.